the Victorian period or era. It was a pivotal time of change and innovation.
Queen Victoria ruled from 1837 to 1901 since she was 18 years old until she died. Until recently, Queen Victoria was the longest reigning monarch of England.
During this time period, citizens were actually called Victorians. However, they did not like royalty at all. But Queen Victoria won the people over and they were called Victorians again.
The Victorian era is known for its societal outlook. Nobility ruled the land.
Victorian literature was actually very popular and still is today. Let's take a look at one of the most famous pieces of literature from the Victorian era.
A popular writer in the Victorian era was Charles Ludwig Dodgson, born January 27, 1832 and died January 14, 1898. Not only was Dodgson a writer, he was a mathematician, an Anglican deacon, and a photographer. Dodgson is better known by his pseudonym, which is Lewis Carroll, famous for writing Alice's Adventure in Wonderland, published November 26, 1865. The book was illustrated by John Tenniel, and it was translated into 174 different languages, making it the number 6 most popular works of literature. The genre is children's literature fiction. Alice was inspired by one of Carroll's friend's daughter. The story began a new era for children's literature because it was the first significant publication that abandoned all serious structure and was only for pure enjoyment. The story follows a little girl named Alice who goes on an adventure in Wonderland and meets so many odd characters, only to find out in the end that it was just a dream.
Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is still a primary piece of literature today, even so that Disney made one animated film as well as 2 live-action movies.
Science fields also prevailed during this time period. Let's take a look at how Charles Darwin revolutionized this time.
Charles Darwin was a scientist during the Victorian era. He wrote The Origin of Species, which is based off a lot of his trips to the Galapagos Islands. He is known as the father of natural selection.
Following are parts of the chapter entitled Natural Selection, or Survival of the Fittest, from Charles Darwin's book Origin of Species, originally published in 1859. Nature, if I may be allowed to personify the natural preservation or survival of the fittest, cares nothing for appearances except in so far as they are useful to any being. Man selects only for his own good, nature only for that of the being which she tends. Every selected character is fully exercised by her, as is implied by the fact of their selection. Under nature, the slightest differences of structure or constitution may well turn the nicely balanced scale in the struggle for life, and so be preserved. How fleeting are the wishes and efforts of man, how short his time, and consequently how poor will be his results compared with those accumulated by nature during whole geological periods. Can we wonder, then, that nature's production should be far truer in character than man's productions, that they should be infinitely better adapted to the most complex conditions of life, and should plainly bear the stamp of far higher workmanship?
When looking into evolution today, we often refer back to Charles Darwin and his Origin of Species.
Overall, the Victorian era is very critical to the development of today's society. Who knows what we would be without it?
I love to start recording this, and then this could be in the movers. And while I'm talking about it, 'cause I know you're recording it now, because I saw you press the button.
So we've all heard of the Victorian era. It was a time period of change and innovation.
Oh wait, this is like practice, because I was like, screw it. The Victorian era is clearly named after Queen Victoria, who ruled from 1837 to 1901. She became queen at the age of 18 until her death. Until recently, she was the longest reigning monarch of England.
During this time period, citizens were actually called Victorians and did not like royalty at all. However, Queen Victoria won the people back over.
I can't even listen. I hate
Are we cutting it out? Okay, this is a practice one.
This is it. This is definitely practice. I just botched this whole thing. The Victorian era is known for its social outlook. Nobility ruled the land.
Victorian literature was very popular back then, and it still is today. Let's take a look at one of the most famous pieces of literature. We've all heard of the Victorian era, or time period. It was a pivotal part of change and innovation.
No. It's just you're looking off to the side.
I was like, I don't know what he said. Oh, I'm sorry.
Queen Victoria ruled from 1837 to 1901. She ruled from 18 years old until she died. Until recently, she was the longest reigning monarch of England.
During this time period, the Victorians were actually...
Alice's Adventure in Wonderland was one of the most popular yet controversial pieces of literature in the Victorian era. Written by Charles Ludwig I can't talk.
How many things should I hold on to? Can I touch the wall?
Don't
Trip in structure or constitution may well turn the nicely balanced scale in the struggle for life, and so people.
Start talking.
Yes.
Did
You put your notes in there?
Yeah.
That was smart.
Yeah. It's too much for me to remember.
Yeah, no.
Honestly.
When you watch ours, you're gonna see us like.
Overall, the Victorian era was very critical to the
I'm funny.
Okay.